Now, as you said, you can't really get too different in terms of the offensive philosophies between both programs. Of course, Davidson running that spread option offense where they run the ball 75% of the time, and that's seen in the stats, averaging over 350 rushing yards per game. That's first in the entire FCS, also averaging nearly 6 yards per carry, whereas Stetson, they like to throw the ball a good amount, especially around 60% of the time. It's that air raid offense that's gotten them to be second in the PFL and 23rd in the FCS in terms of passing yards per game, and so we're going to see two very different offenses this afternoon, and it should put to rest the age-old question of do you run the ball or do you throw the ball? Mari Adams is a beast. I mean, that right there just shows how he's one of the best running backs in the entirety of the FCS. Looking at that replay, nice initial block, being able to bounce off those initial tackles at the line of scrimmage. Get off me, he says. Get off me. I'm taking you into the end zone with me if you don't get off me. Mari Adams, just a physical downhill running back. And that really puts this game out of reach for Stetson midway through the third quarter. Mason Sharon, have yourself a day. 2 touchdown carries, and we're not even through this first quarter. That was phenomenal blocking up front as well. You could drive a truck through that hole that he had with the offensive line. And Davidson, their run game is looking almost unstoppable here early. Well, second verse, same as the verse. You got to remember, they wiped off the Nick Marion touchdown earlier, just ran the same play with him. And they said, QT Teasley, you deserve a touchdown here tonight. We're just going to run the exact same play in the back of the end zone because we know you can beat that Davidson secondary. Looking at that replay, he actually beat him by more than he did the first time around. Nicely placed ball by Mitchell Gossett as well. And we're a 2-point conversion away here, ladies and gentlemen, from this being a tie ball game early in the third quarter. That was a grown man hit right there by Njoku. I mean, my jaw just hit the floor seeing that, looking at the replay. Hard hit right there, causing him to go ahead and drop it. This Davidson defense was struggling on that first drive, but they now have things under control. Great defensive play right there by Davidson. If you're having trouble stopping them, the main thing you could really use is a turnover, and that is a killer if you're Stetson. Now down 3 scores. Already had the momentum snatched away from you. Just good job reading the quarterback's eyes. If you're Mites, you got to do a better job of not staring down your receiver. Those quarterbacks, they think they can go ahead and thread the needle with those over-the-middle throws, but oftentimes you just can't. You can't get caught in that trap if you're Mites and throw that pick over the middle. That is a huge pick six for the Wildcats. That was a dot right there by Sonny Menino, especially since TJ McGee was the guy in coverage. That's a very good cornerback you have to get the ball past, and he placed it perfectly. Sonny Menino showing why the coaches had so much confidence in him coming into this game. Coach Abel, he has a great bag of tricks, and it goes very deep. We saw the onside kick early on in this one. A little razzle-dazzle trickeration right there to go ahead and give it to Reyna in the end zone. Big offensive score right there by Davidson to go ahead and go back up by 2 possessions. Got to be impressed with how this Davidson offense has looked, especially in this first half. Fantastic job right there by Durkin, feeling the pressure, saw a guy coming from the outside and put it right on the money.
Well, Ashton Miller has done a fantastic job stepping up at defensive tackle these last few weeks. Had a standout game against San Diego. He's had some great plays today as well. Pushes Morehead State way back, still technically within their field goal range. But you got to be careful if you're the Eagles, especially since Schwartz has struggled with those field goals in their last couple of games.
Some quarterback changes throughout the season, and that's really been a key for Davidson last week with Andrew Frazier filling in.
Yeah, Andrew Frazier, initially a slot receiver to begin the season, got his first start last week against Presbyterian, played very well, went 8 of 10 passing, 159 passing yards, and a touchdown, taking over for the injured Coulter Cleland and Luke Durkin. There have been 5 players so far this season that have taken snaps at quarterback for Davidson, and then you look at the other side for Marist. Sonny Menino getting his second start of the season, had a very solid outing in his first career start last weekend against Dayton, and they have 3 guys listed as potential starters on their roster, though, at least before kickoff today. And so these are two teams that have a lot of very good quarterbacks on their team, but they have also really struggled to settle with one starter for this season. Well, Mayone is such a solid special teams player for this Davidson team. Did a good job of making a hard cut to the right around the 30-yard line that ultimately gave him the space he needed to work with. Seeing the replay there, just plants his left foot, gets a hole, dodges a tackler. And yes, Holbrook was ultimately able to get him off the angle, but Davidson now with prime field position, what you need, especially if you're a run-heavy offense like Davidson trying to work this 2-minute drill. Very solid drive right there by Marist, and it was a well-put-together drive. Unlike their first drive where they just had to rely upon a 68-yard touchdown pass, it was consistent. They were able to run the offense they wanted to run both on the ground and through the air, and what better way to top it off than giving it to your go-to player on offense to go ahead and get in the end zone. Marist, really nice response. Just a solid drive right there by Luke Durkin, a guy who hasn't played in over a month, and so you're worried that he may be a little rusty, but he ran the offense perfectly on that entire drive. Great read by Durkin right there as well to go ahead, scamper into the end zone for Davidson. And the Wildcats, they're roaring early, and they got Stetson on their heels as they have a 13-0 lead, about to be 14-0, barring the extra point.
Well, very much a redemption play right there after that first play of the game where he dropped and it was picked off. Garnett, just a huge player. We see what he did last week, 90 receiving yards and a touchdown catch. Looking at the replay there, just did a good job of beating those defensive backs across their face. Perfectly put ball by Cravens, and Garnett just goes ahead, turns on the Jets, and takes it to the house for Morehead State. Huge momentum switch right there in favor of the Eagles.
I just think it goes to show that if you're a second or third string guy, you're working hard in the summer and during fall camp and spring ball, and you're thinking, I'm doing all this work, but I'm not going to get any playing time. That's not necessarily true. You never know when the guy in front of you is going to go down, and if two guys in front of you even are going to go down. So all that work you're putting in now, yes, it's for future seasons down the line, but it could come as soon as tomorrow if one play goes badly for the man in front of you.
Again, this is a Morehead State defense that has done more against Davidson than the majority of teams Davidson has played against this year. But at the same time, it's just not getting quite good enough results that it needs right now, especially with an offense that struggles at times to find the end zone. Now, that's usually been good enough for Morehead State, having their defense do most of the work. But today, Davidson, they've been able to crack that wall enough times to where Morehead State's offense can't catch up.
Just a simple slant off of play action, and it works like a charm, especially since that inside part of the field on the defense is going to go ahead and crash in once they see that initial run, and that leaves the middle open, and Brody Rena did a good job positioning himself well. He had a Stetson defender on him, but was able to beat him by a half a step to ultimately get the first down catch.
Had a career day against Davidson last year, 3 touchdown catches in the second half. And it's important to note, that was a game last year. Davidson came to it 6-0 in the PFL, then Morehead State completely spoiled Davidson's season off of that 47-17 victory. Now it's Davidson that has the chance to play spoiler to Morehead State's season.
I mean, they are just physical. I mean, these aren't speed backs that try to hit the outside and try to avoid contact. These are guys who play like men in the trenches, who lower their shoulder, are willing to get that extra yard or two just off of being physical. And yes, it could bring some wear and tear, but it also gives you a lot of physical strength, which you need as the season goes on.
See of Deuce Linder.
Linder, the transfer from South Carolina State, so he already has some FCS experience, only 2 catches for 26 yards through 3 games last season, but he is a really nice addition to this Catawba squad that has a lot of transfer players.
And he's 6'4". Big target out wide.
Oh, yeah, and you're going to try to go ahead, take that height advantage throughout this ball game. Wouldn't be surprised to see them just try to throw a few fade routes to him in the end zone as well as this game progresses.
This is the bounce-back performance Scott Abel was looking for.
It very much is. It just does so much for Davidson. It puts you in a position where you can match the amount of wins you had last season if they can get the job done at Valparaiso 2 weeks from now. You now have a bye coming up for the Wildcats, just a time to go ahead, take one final rest before your final game against the Beacons. And what better way to really end this game than having Luke Durkin, who stayed with Davidson through thick and thin, ultimately taking the knee on the final play here on Senior Day. He's done a good job of being one of the leaders of the senior class, a senior class that you've mentioned too, has been one of the most successful here at Davidson.
Hand off to Mari Adams. That's something you're going to be saying a lot today, Paul. I mean, it is the Mari Adams show oftentimes in the backfield. They love feeding him the football, average over 6 yards per carry. Walter Payton Award watch list player. I mean, he is such a phenomenal running back for this Davidson squad. Mari Adams is playing pinball here on Cooper Field. I mean, he was just going off of different Hoya tacklers right there, just dragging men along with him. That's just a breakdown in pass protection right there by Georgetown. You already have that second-string guy coming in there, so you have that potential for confusion. And Saman McLaughlin basically just went into the backfield untouched. Well, I think it's safe to say now that Bryce Cox is Georgetown's secret weapon. Wasn't even initially on the 2 deep, was listed as the third-string running back, but has been used a decent amount here in the first 20 minutes or so and had a really nice run there. That was Davidson football right there. Get the slot receivers involved in some of the motion games. Go ahead and give it to Mason Sharon. Let him go up the middle, get those tough yards. Really, really solid offensive possession by the Davidson Wildcats. If you're up in the conversation with a Manning, that means you're doing pretty dang good. But looking at him a little bit more, it was the PFL Offensive Player of the Week for September 30th in their last game. Went 23 of 35 with 323 passing yards and 5 touchdowns up against Marist. That same week was also the Stats Perform National Freshman of the Week. He has gotten better as the season has gone on, and he had his best day of his entire career last game against Marist. And on top of that, he's only a redshirt freshman, so Dayton's going to have him around for a long time, and you have to feel pretty confident in your offense when you have a guy like that taking the snaps. Well, Mason Sharon has not been able to be stopped so far this afternoon. If he keeps this up, may very well be the PFL Offensive Player of the Week. Has had 2 long runs for touchdowns, and when he hasn't busted one open, he's still getting good 5 to 6 yard carries every time. Davidson with the extra point now to potentially take the lead. Got to be careful, though. They've had 2 field goals blocked this afternoon. This is a very interesting Dayton defense because they're listed on our 2 deep kind of as a 4-2-5, but for a lot of that game against Marist, they were really in a 3-3-5, and they can bring some of their linebackers and even some of their defensive backs on a delayed blitz. Looks like they're starting out at a 4-man front, but it's really flexible, and it allows Dayton to go ahead and change their defense depending on who they're playing and what down and distance it is. Great job by Amari Hill, his second career interception, just going step for step with Coleman and making a nice play on the ball against a really good receiver in Coleman. Now, if you're Davidson, you have the question of, do you go ahead and try to put another drive together here with 58 seconds left and 1 timeout, or do you just go ahead and preserve this 6-point deficit and take a knee? When there was going into Zawagi's face, if it was going towards his back, he may have had the distance to make it. The ball also looked like it was a little bit wide left, at least from our angle up here. But that's just a tough way to finish this game. You got to give Dayton credit, though. They did a good job of handling this very tough Davidson offense and were able to make play after play on special teams to go ahead and get the win today. Kind of an old guard versus new guard type matchup. I mean, you look at San Diego, and throughout their entire history, they were at the top of the PFL year after year after year in the 2000s and the 2010s. And then it's really Davidson that kind of dislodged them from that spot. I mean, just looking more at how dominant San Diego has been, 12 PFL championships, have made it to the FCS playoffs on 5 occasions, are the only PFL team to win a playoff game as well. And so this is a good program, 2 good programs today. And so Davidson, they're going to have to bring their A game because even though San Diego, they've fallen off a little bit compared to where they once were, it's still a very, very solid ball club. Great push right there by Mason Sharon and the Davidson up front. That should have really been just a gain of 2 or 3, but did a good job of turning his legs and falling forward to get those solid 6 yards. Well, there was the question right there to just go ahead and go for 2 if you're Davidson, as that'd make it a 16-point deficit and thus technically a 2-possession game. But going back to Michael Leonard, I mean, that's a tough job being a long snapper and also having to play defense, going in occasionally as a tight end on offense, and even being used sometimes on kickoff return. And if you ask a guy to do all those different things, then that just go ahead and increases the odds that his long snapping game may be thrown off a little bit. I mean, especially in today's age of college football, where those special teams guys are really specialized to go ahead and just try to focus in that one category. The Toreros really like using those rollout passes, also like putting guys in motion to provide some window dressing before those offensive plays. And if you're Davidson, you just have to ID that and not allow Reed to ultimately get open like that because of him going in motion out of the backfield.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, from Torero Stadium as San Diego currently leads Davidson at the half 37-13. Jasim Reed has really been the star of the show so far for the Toreros with 10 catches for 163 receiving yards and 2 touchdown grabs. We're going to go ahead and take a look throughout the rest of the PFL. All these scores are final as it's currently just past 5:30 p.m. on the East Coast, still 2:36 out here in Cali. Final, we have Presbyterian with the upset over Dayton 28-17. Peter Lipscomb kicks 4 field goals for the Blue Hose, and Presbyterian also with 4 takeaways in that one. That really shakes up the PFL standings as Presbyterian with a very, very solid win at home. Then Butler beating Stetson 46-13. Butler improves to 7-2 overall this year. Nick Howard had 3 touchdown runs on the ground, the main running quarterback for Butler, with a very solid afternoon as Stetson drops to 2-6 overall after that one. And then another big upset as Moorhead State, who has turned into the dark horse of the PFL, with a solid 21-7 home win against St. Thomas of Minnesota. St. Thomas, that's their first PFL loss so far this season. Moorhead State, of course, coming down to Davidson next weekend in what could be a pretty big PFL game in that one, especially if Davidson can find a way to come back in today's game.